Welcome to European Journeys. This is the sixth stage of a series in which we explore the Reformation in Sweden. What we are going to do today is explore an aspect of the Reformation that is sometimes overlooked, and that is the influence that trade has had in the spread of the Reformation. And in fact, quite often history books focus on the role of theologians, and to be sure, their role was crucial, fundamental, in fact, for the spread of the Reformation. But the Reformation, in fact, would not have succeeded also without the impact that merchants or businessmen have had in the spread of the Lutheran doctrines. So what we're going to do today is to visit an area of the country which can help us understand the crucial role that they had. So we're going to go to Östergötland, that's the county that we are going to focus in. And as we zoom in, we're going to explore a town named Söderköping. Now, Söderköping simply means the marketplace of the south. And that means that there's also a marketplace of the north, as you can see on the map. That's Norrköping. It's located 50 kilometers away from Söderköping. Now, Söderköping is ideally located. It's at the entry of an estuary that flows to the Baltic Sea, and it's located along the shores of the river Storån, also known as Söderköpingsån. Well, the exact place we are going to visit in the city, in the town, I would say it has about 10,000 inhabitants. The exact place we are going to visit is an ancient printing house. It is named Brasken Tryckeri, as you can see on the picture. It's a typical ancient house that can be found in the old towns of Sweden. It has brick foundations painted in white and a red wooden upper part. And there, on the house, there is a plaque that reads, I'm going to read the translation, Bishop Hans Brask had, according to tradition, had a printing house in this house between 1523 to 1526. So, we have a printing house, we have the name of a bishop, Hans Brask. Who were they? Who was Hans Brask, and what was that printing house about? Well, before we talk about that, we need to establish the context, and that's the context of what was happening there in Söderköping at the time. As I said, Söderköping was a marketplace. It was established as such in the beginning of the second millennium, and there merchants came from all around Europe. So Söderköping became an international center very quickly. Now, as is the case in international places, ideas circulate, not just goods circulated there in Söderköping, but also ideas, communication from other parts of Europe. And so we can understand that the Reformation began to spread very quickly there. The ideas of the Reformation entered really through Söderköping. And that we, in fact, have it confirmed through some of the writings of Hans Brask, who said that clearly Söderköping is an entry point for the Reformation, for the doctrines of the Reformation to spread in Sweden. But that was not all. Söderköping was really ripe to accept these doctrines. And that was related to the situation at the time that the town was encountering. At the time, there was a war going on with Denmark since the beginning of the 1500s. And the church, the Roman Catholic Church that is, at the time, began to go through a serious economic crisis. In Söderköping, there was a hospital that served the sick, the poor, and it was a hospital that worked through tithes and offerings. Well, the cathedral chapter in Linköping, that is the rulers of the area of the diocese in which Söderköping was, the cathedral chapter there in Linköping, decided to transfer the tithes and offerings from the hospital to themselves, to the cathedral chapter. That was one of the solutions that they had found. Well, the city there in Söderköping was not very happy with that. The leaders of the hospital were not happy with that. And so there was friction, basically, between Söderköping and Linköping. Well, you can imagine that when the Lutheran doctrines began to appear in Söderköping, the town was really ripe to receive them and to accept them. So much so that the hospital very quickly sent 2 of their people to Germany to study in Lutheran universities. And also we know from the ancient text that the preachers there in Söderköping very quickly approved the Lutheran doctrines. So that's for the context of Söderköping. Söderköping really was ripe for the Reformation, and it was a place where the doctrines began to spread across the country. Now we come to Hans Brask. He was a bishop. He was the bishop of Linköping at the time. He was over 60 when the Reformation began to spread there. And he is known to be the most ferocious opponent to the Reformation. He was a Roman Catholic bishop. He was for the status quo. For him, continuity had to be preserved over and against novelty. Novelty was heresy. Well, to be more precise, here was the content of his grievances against the Lutheran doctrines, which he considered heretical. He complained that they condemned the Mass. They despised the sacraments. They were opposed to the compulsory celibacy of monks and nuns. They overthrew images of Christ and the saints from the church. And they were opposed to the worship of Mary. They also spoke against the merit of good works, the purgatory, the confession, penance, fasts, invocation of saints, prayer for the dead, indulgences, and many other points. That was too much for Hans Brask. He could not bear that. Well, how did he proceed? He made it his mission to eradicate the Lutheran, what he considered to be the heresy of Lutheranism in Sweden. The first step he took was to prohibit, obviously, Lutheran writings in his diocese. He could not do that for all of Sweden. He was just the bishop of the area there. So he began to prohibit that even before Gustav Vasa became king. But when Gustav Vasa became king and began to surround himself with Lutheran counselors, then Hans Brask understood that he had to make his mission to speak to the king, and so he began to write numerous letters to the king, trying to convince him to get rid of these heretical counselors, according to him, of course. But Hans Brask knew that that was not enough. Hans Brask had understood what was the root of the success of the Reformation, and that was the fact that it was a grassroots movement. It was not a movement that just spread to kings and to leaders of the church, but it spread among the common people. And why was this possible? Well, that was because of the invention of the printing press that had happened some years before. And so Hans Brask understood that if he wanted to go against the Lutheran, the spread of Lutheranism, of the Reformation in Sweden, he had himself to launch a grassroots movement. How would he do that? Well, by building a printing house there in Söderköping. So the printing house didn't serve for economic purpose, but really for his ideological purpose, doctrinal purpose, to spread anti-Lutheran pamphlets over Sweden. And that's what he did starting from 1523, began to print pamphlets and spread them in the country. Well, as you can see from the plague, the house only lasted 4 years. In 1526, it was closed. And what was the reason? Well, in the meantime, Hans Brask began to realize that he could not gain back the king to his own influence. So what he did was that he began to spread writings also indirectly, but quite clearly against the king by, for example, translating an edict from the German emperor against Martin Luther, and also from one of the dukes, the Duke George from the area of Saxony, against Martin Luther. That for Gustav Vasa was too much, and so Gustav Vasa ordered the closure of the printing house, and so Hans Brask had even to go away from Sweden, to flee from Sweden, and he tried to continue his activities from Copenhagen, but it didn't last long. Finally, he had to be exiled and finished his life in a monastery in Poland, which was Roman Catholic, of course. Well, that's for an overview of what's happened there. in Söderköping, how merchants really tried to spread and succeeded in spreading the Lutheran doctrines, and how Hans Brask tried and failed to counter the Lutheran, the spread of the Reformation in Sweden. What we can see there is two worldviews basically that were colliding. For Hans Brask, authority came from those who were considered, recognized as the authority, and that was obviously the Pope, that was the church councils, that was the canon law. But for the Reformation, for the reformers, and that was in fact a movement that started already in the 1400s, authority was to be found in scriptures, and in scriptures alone. So even the Pope, even the church councils, even canon law had to be analyzed from the lenses of scriptures. And so that was the clash, really, between Hans Brask and those who spread the Reformation there in Sweden. And the clash, indeed, was pretty evident there in Söderköping. Well, I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next time for another stage of European Journeys. If you like European Journeys, I invite you to go to cedricplacentino.substack.com. You see the name there on the screen right now. And there, if you sign up, you will be able to receive articles and the videos in your mailbox. Thank you.